Just to give you an overall idea of where the Australian money or wealth sits, Australian residential property market is about $11 trillion worth of market. This is all of dwellings all over Australia. We have about 11.2 million homes, including apartments, units, and everything. 3.9 trillion sits in superannuation, 3.2 trillion in stocks, and about 1.2 trillion in commercial property. So if I was to look at that, where the Australian overall wealth sits at, or where the dollar value is, its majority of it is in residential property. Commercial property is only about 10% of that. And when I break down commercial into other factors, such as industrial, office, and retail, that pie becomes very, very small. From growth point of view, this is over last 3 months, so this is the last quarter. So we're talking about September, October, and end of November, last 3 months. Sydney property prices on an average went backwards by 0.5%, Melbourne 1%, Brisbane, Adelaide, and Perth, which are the other three capital cities, went up respectively between 1.8 to 3%. Now, 2%, 3%, while the numbers sound low, this is over a quarter. What that basically means is an average $700,000 property going up by 3% is $21,000 in 3 months, $9,000 month on month going up. That is what's happening in some of the other states. And Victoria, yes, as you know, but we're obviously rightfully waiting and playing the waiting game. Yeah. Property is always a long-term game. It's not about investing for 2 months or 3 months. So if you are only wanting to be in property for a period of 1 month, 2 months, 1 year, 2 years, it's not investing, it's speculating and it's gambling. Because with any form of investment, it should be treated with a 10 to 15 year view. That's where the wealth creation happens. It's not a get-rich-quick scheme. It's not like crypto where one day you buy it and next day it's 100% up and third day it's 80% down. That is a very risk asset. This is very different. If I look at over the last 12 months, so November 23 to November 2024, in Sydney, an average medium house price went up by about 3.3%. Melbourne, negative 2.3%. Brisbane, 12%. Adelaide, 14%. And Perth, 21%. One of the key things to highlight here, and I'm only going to talk about the top 5 cities because in our business, Hobart, Darwin, and Tasmania, and Canberra, they're not states where we look at investing. They're not investable states for us. So we're talking about the 5 capital cities. Medium value in Sydney is now sitting at about 1.19 million, so about 1.2 million. Interestingly enough, Melbourne is no longer the second most expensive city. In fact, it's the lowest when I'll compare the all capital cities. Melbourne is now 777,000, whereas all the other 3 cities, Brisbane, Adelaide, and Perth, they're well above 800,000. So if we think property is expensive in Melbourne, Queensland, Perth, and Adelaide have actually overtaken Melbourne over the last 12 months. If I go back almost 2 years ago, an average medium in Perth and Adelaide would have been well below 600. And that's what's been happening. And please ask me any questions as I'm going along. Happy to answer, so you don't have to wait till the end. Or any comments, feedback, happy to take those. Rents. One of the things you mentioned as someone young looking at renting, rents have been going up. Annual rent increase on average is sitting at about just under 7%. And if I look at capital cities here, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Adelaide, Perth, on average they're going up by about 6 to 10%. What that means is if you were paying $500 a week rent last year in November 2023, now in Perth you're paying about 10% more, which is $550. In Melbourne, you're paying about 6.5% more. So just to give you an overall idea of where the Australian money or wealth sits, Australian residential property market is about $11 trillion worth of market. This is all of dwellings all over Australia. We have about 11.2 million homes, including apartments, units, and everything. 3.9 trillion sits in superannuation, 3.2 trillion in stocks, and about 1.2 trillion in commercial property. So if I was to look at that, where the Australian overall wealth sits at, or where the dollar value is, its majority of it is in residential property. you.